Peace, at it again. Part 2, Chapter 2. The Powernomics Vision for Black America. The Powernomics vision is a Black America that is politically and economically self-sufficient and competitive by the year 2005. Obviously, that was over 13 years ago, but this is still necessary. The Powernomics Group vision is crafted to do a number of things. First, it is called the Powernomics vision to lock into Black America's mind, a concept that defines the solution for our racial predicament. We need economic power. This newly coined phrase and vision will keep us from wandering back into the pursuit of limited social goals. Secondly, this vision is very specific. It tells us what we are seeking: political and economic self-sufficiency and competitiveness. Any acts or issues that do not result in greater ownership and control of economic and political resources for Black Americans do not fit the Powernomics template and should be given a low priority. Third, the group vision sets a timetable, the year 2005. This is a short but workable timetable if we commit ourselves to the task. Any shorter period is unrealistic. Any longer period and we would be much too far in a permanent underclass status for any actions to make a real difference. The Powernomics vision is offered as a beginning point. The Black America is free to use it as a guide and build on it as required. The Powernomics vision reduces confusion about issues and makes it more difficult to mislead the group into focusing time and resources on symbolism rather than substance. The Powernomics vision, founded on an empowerment culture, prioritizes and directs our energy and resources into activities that result in Black people becoming more self-sufficient and competitive. There are many examples of activities that are at odds with Black empowerment, such as including Blacks in the concept of minority. For example, major American corporations are again pushing Congress to increase the immigration quota on the number of highly trained foreign nationals who could immigrate into this country to fill high-tech jobs. This practice has a direct impact on Black Americans. Trained in their country of origin, these immigrants represent a free ride for American corporations. They do not have to pay for the training of the immigrants, and they also avoid paying taxes to educate undereducated Americans, especially Black Americans, for these high-tech jobs. They do not feel any political obligation to hire Black Americans, even though there are also many Black scientists and engineers already qualified for these high-tech positions. A group of Black engineers, physicists, and other scientists formed a coalition to fight corporate efforts to bring in more immigrants over Blacks. These corporate efforts to bring in more immigrants, these immigrants are rarely, if ever, from a Black country. Unfortunately, the coalition of Black engineers and physicists made the mistake of framing the issue as a minority issue rather than a Black issue. The group solicited support from the Congressional Black Caucus. The response of the Congressional Black Caucus was to ask that measures be taken to boost minority employment. The response of the White House further misfocused the issue. Rather than aiding the Black scientists and engineers, the White House recommended legislation to provide training programs to all Americans with a special emphasis on minorities, women, poor students, and the disabled. These Black engineers got what they asked for. The immigrating technical workers are non-Black minorities. The problem? Nobody wants to propose Black solutions for Black problems. Society is more comfortable recommending broad minority solutions for problems that are actually unique to Black people alone. The recommendations of Black scientists, the Congressional Black Caucus, and the White House will help Hispanics, women, and a myriad of other groups, but not one will help the Black scientists who raised the issue. Hispanics and all of the imported foreign workers will be direct competitors to Blacks because of their minority status. Requesting assistance for minorities is actually requesting assistance for competing groups. The solution fashion did not solve the problem of Black scientists. In contrast, the Powernomics vision is designed to give a sense of direction based on group self-interest to economically and politically empower Black people by the year 2005. The third key to empowerment. The third key to empowerment is two supportive Powernomic paradigms that can function as windows through which Black America's view of the world is further refined. We must not underestimate the importance of having paradigms that guide us to see, think, and behave as a group based upon our own self-interest. These two paradigms are ethno-aggregation and vertical integration. They align with the Powernomics vision for Black America, ensure up interest group deficiencies, and counter the most insidious aspects of structural racism and inappropriate behavior. These Powernomics paradigms are very important tools in our empowerment chest. They are specifically formulated, designed, and engineered to further shape and guide Black people's behavior in the 21st century. The old civil rights paradigms no longer make sense in a competitive, pseudo-color-blinded society. They are not grounded in the reality. They have encouraged and prepared blacks to compromise rather than to compete. Jeff Gates, in his book Ownership Solution, helped define the role of a paradigm. He stated the word paradigm came from the Greek word for pattern, and it was used by Plato to describe a basic form or image encompassing one's fate and fortune and determining one's destiny. In other words, paradigms are deeply held assumptions or values that operate like models, templates, or patterns. They shape what we see in a cultural and racial context. In practical applications using the Powernomics vision and paradigms is comparable to dressmaking. The process begins with the dressmaker's visions of the garment he or she wants to create. In the vision, it is clear whether the garment will be a dress or a blouse. After the dressmaker has decided on the nature of the garment, he or she needs a pattern or paradigm to ensure that the pieces cut for the garment are identical to the pattern. The pattern will determine whether the dress will be long or short, have sleeves, a gathered waist, or flared skirt. The pattern ensures that all the dresses made from the pattern are the same. Likewise, the Powernomics paradigms will shape our group thinking and behavior, establish a consistent group mindset, and guide Black America's collective decision-making. They will reduce conflicts and establish a stage upon which we can act out our respective roles. As much as we would like to believe this nation is a melting pot and that we are indivisible, that is not and never has been the case. We are a collection of groups bound together by one national government, but we still have different histories, agendas, cultures, and needs. Black Americans remain outside of the mainstream society because whiteness is non-porous to blackness. Is Black success totally dependent on acceptance into the white mainstream society? No, it is not. The two paradigms that follow are the next two empowerment keys. They will help Black America to own and control resources so they can compete inside or outside of the mainstream society. Paradigm number one, ethno-aggregation. Ethno-aggregation is best defined as the voluntary concentration of individuals and their resources around their ethnic or language commonalities for the purpose of improving their economic and political competitiveness. The term ethno-aggregation may be new, but the concept is not. It is a behavior pattern used every day by religious, gender, ethnic, and Spanish-speaking groups. The culture of these groups emphasizes that members rally around common characteristics or attributes, ethno, in order to pool their collective resources, aggregation, and compete with non-group members. According to the Powernomics plan, the primary purpose for ethno-aggregation is to convert disaggregated Black individuals and groups into a national team and to concentrate their resources. The more concentrated their resources, the greater their impact and competitive advantage will be. For Black Americans, this paradigm is important because it can directly reverse past conditioning and is the antidote for Willie Lynchism, or a slaveholder plan to divide and conquer Black slaves. Ethno-aggregation encourages Blacks to unify as a people and as an alternative to seeking to unite with others. It encourages Blacks to pool their resources. A fist has greater impact than 5 separate fingers, but a scattered group is like separate fingers. The impact of the 5 fingers working together as a fist has an even stronger impact if directed towards the weakest part of a competitive force. An aggregated group has a competitive advantage over a group whose resources are scattered. Likewise, ethno-aggregation is most effective when the resources are organized and directed. Blacks already ethno-aggregate every time they attend all Black churches and participate in the Million Man March. In politics, we have voted as a bloc within both the Republican and Democratic Party, and although we have seldom received direct benefits, our collective voting has testified to our political strength and our ability to ethno-aggregate. We must now learn to be more strategic with our ability to ethno-aggregate in politics, learn how to unite and concentrate our financial resources to achieve group economic goals, just as whites and ethnic immigrants have done for centuries. Examples of ethno-aggregation. Our society is replete with examples of how whites and ethnic groups aggregate for political and economic competitive advantages in the marketplace. Pardon me. Organizing begets group power. Before the Black Civil Rights Movement, Europeans, English, Jews, Irish, Germans, and Italians, used their togetherness as a social and economic foundation. American Indians have been successful in using their ethnic image and treaty rights to hold on to reservation lands and government subsidies. In recent years, they have enjoyed windfall wealth from their approximately 257 gambling casino permits. Newly arrived ethnic and language groups aggregate their resources to build political and economic communities such as Chinatowns, Little Koreas, little Cambodias, little Saigons, little Vietnams, and little Havanas. Of all the above, Miami's Cuban community in South Florida represents probably the most visible model of ethno-aggregation in the country. Cubans control the political and economic activities of South Florida, which has become their home turf. As they came into the country, they first rallied around their common language characteristics, then they voluntarily aggregated into the same neighborhood and established businesses. Next, they began to compete with non-members of their group. They took control of the politics, the schools, and dominated the language. They take pride in being a closed society. They are very nationalistic and sometimes even push the rule of law. In political and economic terms, Cubans have placed a flag in the ground around Little Havana, Hialeah, and South Florida. From behind their Latin culture and Spanish language, they aggressively intervene in international affairs. They play a key role in Radio Marti, radio programming being directly at Cuba via satellite for the sole purpose of erasing or interfering with Cuba's regular radio broadcasting. They have flown airplanes in the Cuban airspace to drop leaflets and interfere with the Castro government. They have rallied around common characteristics, pooled their resources, and improved their economic and political standing. Cubans in South Florida require those who come into their area to play their game by their rules. Within one generation, Cuban immigrants economically and politically subordinated Black Miamians and became a political challenge to whites throughout the state of Florida. Arab immigrants in and around Detroit are probably the second best example of ethno-aggregation. They began coming into this country about the same time as Cubans in the late 60s, and like Cubans, they ethno-aggregated to such an extent within a 30-year period, they totally subordinated blacks in selected cities and have begun to challenge the majority white society for both wealth and power. Approximately 275,000 Arabs migrated into the Dearborn, Michigan, and Detroit areas initially. In that short time period, Arabs built the largest, wealthiest, and most powerful political base outside of the Middle East. They invest their profits to build more businesses in black communities. They almost exclusively hire their own people and refuse to buy from black businesses. Black Detroiters serve as a large concentrated consumer pool that Arabs use to enrich themselves in their countries of origin. Detroit is an 82% black city, according to an article in Detroit News from July 8, 1999. Arabs, who constitute less than 1% of this city's metropolitan area population, have taken control of 90% of the city's gas stations, grocery stores, party stores, discount strip malls, and medical supply businesses. According to the article, Arab businesses were so profitable last year, their owners sent $69 million back to their homelands to help Arabs who were fighting with Israel in the Middle East. This drain of capital weakened Black Detroit, but strengthened the developing Arab communities. Once Arab immigrants aggregated and concentrated their resources in and around Detroit, they increasingly used their acquired economic power to obtain local political power. Arabs know that politics follows money. Politics follows the money. In this regard, it was reported that when Al Gore, the Vice President of the United States, visited Detroit in the summer of '99, he chose to meet up with the top 100 Arab businessmen, not the black political leadership. Arabs pledged heavy financial support to Gore, and in return for their financial pledges, they asked for greater business opportunities in Black Detroit. Arabs are now in a phase of ethno-aggregation where they are beginning to use the wealth and power they acquire from blacks to politically and economically subordinate blacks. To shore up, protect, and give credibility to their ethno-aggregation, Detroit Arabs hold street festivals and encourage blacks and whites to attend. They engender pride in their own people by promoting their culture, religion, and language while masking over the economic competitiveness that they are conducting against blacks in Detroit. It is their ethno-aggregation that gives Arab immigrants their competitive advantages over black Americans. They use their cultural togetherness to compete for economic and political resources. Even though Arabs may have religious differences with the Jews and some Christians, they are still classified as whites and receive the advantage of a higher level of social acceptability than blacks. Arab immigrants use their ethnic advantages by remaining an identifiable, non-assimilated group politically and economically linked into a national and international network. The implications for Black America. Arab immigrants, in limited ways, can be a powerful example to blacks who have integrated out of black neighborhoods. Arab immigrants see clearly why they ought to ethno-aggregate and remain culturally and financially connected to their own people and their own power base. Blacks, on the other hand, have been continuously weakened by events from the diaspora, slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and integration, all of which have made blacks a scattered group. The ethno-aggregation paradigm is specifically designed to shore up the weaknesses created by the involuntary and voluntary scattering of Black people. Power itself always exists in concentrated forms. The application of ethno-aggregation will create mindsets that provide incentives for Black people to learn and pull together to concentrate our power resources and compete with various ethnic minorities as well as the majority monopolies identified in Chapter 1. With the mindset of ethno-aggregation, we will begin to have more control over our own fate regardless of what the majority society decides. One way to explain ethno-aggregation is to view it as a form of voluntary separation, just like Little Italy and Greektown are separate ethnic enclaves. More specifically, ethno-aggregation signals that we as Black people have gone a full route of integration and have found it wanting. Now we want to pull back a little and to voluntarily interact with members of our own race. Actually, our greatest competitive advantage rests in being neither integrated nor forcefully segregated. Jews, American Indians, Hispanics, Asians, and Arabs have the option to assimilate, but have chosen instead to maintain separate institutions, organizations, and communities. Like them, we as Black people want the same option, to have, own, and control our own institutions, organizations, and communities. Our first step to group empowerment is to develop communities in which to practice ethno-aggregation. Blacks are the only group in America that do not have communities. We have residential neighborhoods. Decades of integration caused an exodus of middle and upper middle class professional Blacks, the backbone of our community, into the white suburbs, thus weakening the cohesiveness of earlier Black neighborhoods and making it difficult physically and psychologically to identify and amass our group resources. We are still stymied. Under racial segregation, white indifference to Black communities allowed Blacks to have Black businesses and a sense of community. But while we could aggregate our resources, we were never allowed to use those resources to achieve a group goal or to function as fully independent and competitive communities. Pooling group resources. The ethno-aggregation paradigm creates a context within which Blacks can come together and share. In ethno-aggregation within Black communities, every individual contributes to the group's pool of resources. Individually, Blacks may be poor, but even poor Blacks can contribute to resources that collectively benefit individual group members as well as the group as a whole. One may have only a cup full of beans, another may only have a few strips of bacon, another only carrots. Yet when the individual ingredients are collected, the group can make soup to feed itself or sell to others. This is the competitive advantage of a group. Black leadership, politicians, government officials, corporations, and marketing firms do a disservice to us when they support and recommend policies that disperse our resources and make us vulnerable to others as a passive consumer market. A move towards voluntary separation. Regrouping Blacks through ethno-aggregation is necessary to counter the effects of individualism, which teaches Blacks to oppose each other rather than pool resources and cooperate with one another. Ethno-aggregation would give Blacks a powerful political and economic base. To this end, while serving as the education advisor to then Florida Governor Rubin Askew during integration, I always stress the importance of Blacks retaining their communities and educational institutions, and that the state of Florida should not place the burden of integration on the shoulders of Blacks. While speaking out on the issue of school integration, I said to an audience that Black people should not have to leave their communities to find quality schools, homes, or consumer products. After my speech, a concerned Southern white gentleman approached me and said, "Dr. Anderson, after listening to you, I am more confused than ever about what Black people want. On one hand, you have Reverend Martin Luther King pushing for integration. On the other hand, you have Malcolm X pushing for separation. Which end of the stick do you Black people want?" I answered that we did not want either end of the stick. We want the same rights and privileges that every other group has, the right to choose. I asked the gentleman, "Have you ever asked Indians, Hispanic, Jews, Arabs, gays, women, or Asians which end of the stick they want?" The gentleman shook his head and said, "You are right. You all should have that right. I just never thought about it like that." Most Americans have probably never thought about it like that either. Black people have an obligation to come together as a group in their own best interests. America should be neither threatened nor puzzled by the thought that Blacks would not want to be forced into either choice. Blacks in America are the only ethnic or racial group that continues to wrestle with the philosophical debate over integration versus segregation, when in fact, neither one has to be accepted. As long as people are not forced into separate sectors and no group has monopolistic control of the resources that are locked into their institutions and communities, there is nothing wrong with separation or integration. Groups do not have to hate and exploit each other simply because they are informally divided. The failure of integration is tragic, especially when one considers that among all the so-called minorities, only blacks have openly pursued integration. Hispanics, Asians, Arabs, and Jews, all of whom are members of the major society, are unilaterally committed to maintaining their own separate communities and organizations, even though they have the option of assimilating. Though ethnic immigrants are included in this nation's definition of minority and are eligible for affirmative action assistance, the majority society does not require them to integrate their people and resources. If they do not have to integrate to be acceptable, why do blacks? Would not a voluntary return to some form of separation provide Black America some of the communal strength of other racial groups and ethnics? For instance, Jews tried integration in Europe in the mid-19th century, but it did not work. Later, when they were forced into ghettos in various European cities, as horrible as the situation was, they found one advantage. Being separated from the rest of the population made Jews more self-reliant, more productive, and more zealously committed to preserving their group's unity, culture, and wealth at all costs. Aggregating around our own assets and self-interest can do the same for us as Black Americans. An ethno-aggregation paradigm has the task of recapturing and concentrating Black cultural resources scattered by the integration process. The integration process took away our sense of community, leadership, talent, and brain power, labor, disposable income, athletes, entertainers, business and professional middle class and cultural assets. Retrieving some of these lost assets and storing them inside of the Black communities will give us competitive advantages and platforms upon which we can begin to build our own political, economic, and cultural systems. I'm going to stop there for now. We're going to finish chapter 2 when I come back later on. Y'all have a great day. Peace.